producing high-risk campaigns. I'm going to start on a weirdly practical note, and that is to say, I know that sometimes it can drive you nuts if you're making notes in a presentation and you think you've missed a reference or a particular bit of stimulus. Right at the end of my presentation there will be a link on the last slide, and if you follow that link you will find all the assets and a long form version of this presentation. So if you just want to sit back and relax after your tea break, you absolutely can do that. So I want to talk to you today about making creatively brave ideas happen. And as I was preparing to do this talk, I did a really scary bit of maths, where I've now worked in the advertising industry for 19 years, which I was slightly staggered by. I've worked client side and I've worked agency side, which gives me a really useful perspective. But the one thing that has kept me going throughout all of those years is the opportunity to make really creatively brave work. Otherwise, why would you bother being in the industry in the first place? About 18 months ago, brothers and sisters won a pitch for Capcom, a Japanese games developer who have developed the very successful and famous franchise, the Resident Evil games. Our task was to launch that amidst a category that was bound in conventions. Most games globally launched relied on in-game footage and just showing the technical wizardry and showcasing the product, basically. We won that pitch because we said we wanted to focus on moving people, because we said we wanted to get people to actually feel something. What we ended up doing was telling a 9-month story across media. I'm not going to take you through all of it, because it's not necessary and it would bore you to tears. I am going to show you the launch ad that aired on television just once across the world a month before the game launched. Launch for Capcom. But it made me think about what is the thread that holds creatively brave work together. When you talk to people about creatively brave work, the ads they reference are usually pretty funny or kind of rude in some way, maybe a bit sexy, maybe a bit salacious. And all of those things are absolutely valid, but they're executional devices. I think what defines brave work is something maybe a little bit deeper than that. I think it's about challenging conventions. I think it's about bucking the trend. I think it's about heading west when everyone else is heading north. I think it's about having the bravery to have a really authentic tone of voice to your brand. Can we skip 2 charts, please? And then I thought about all the ads that we consume as consumers. And I don't know whether you share this view, but quite often if I'm sitting at home with my family and we're looking at ads together, I feel a little bit embarrassed. And I feel a little bit embarrassed because a lot of the work I see is a little bit disappointing. It's not terrible, it's okay, it's not brilliant. And I wonder why it is. And I'm an optimist, and I absolutely believe that it's not due to lack of talent in our industry. I've met some brilliant people along the way, some real lateral thinkers, and I think the chances are all of us in this room have the capacity to think of a creatively brave idea. I think the problem starts with the fact that the creatively brave idea is a very, very delicate thing. Brave ideas need nurturing. They need protecting. They need a certain kind of time to live and breathe and grow. And the problem is, maybe it's not so much that we don't have enough creative ideas that are brave. Maybe just not enough brave creative ideas see the light of day. Because from day one, the advertising process can treat a brave idea really quite harshly. It has to jump through a number of hoops, and it has to jump through a number of hoops quite quickly. The first thing you have is the first internal agency review. There's probably an account manager in the room, and they're probably thinking, oh my God, what's the client going to say? Oh God, no, we can't do that. No, but that's not exactly on brief. You've probably got a producer thinking, well, the budget's only about 100 grand. How the hell am I supposed to make that for 100 grand? And before you've even set off on its journey, the delicate brave idea is having rocks thrown at it. To the point where it can be pushed or pulled, and it kind of loses its zing. And either it disappears completely, or it's morphed into an entirely different form, where it's just lost its inner sparkle. And essentially, a brave idea is no good to us if it's put in the bin or the bottom drawer. So what I want to talk about today is making a good idea happen. Because that, in my head, is an art form in itself. Yes, it may be all the perceived unsexy bits of an agency. It's the backroom stuff. It's about process. It's about HR, who you hire and how you hire them. It's about account management. It's about project management. All of the things that as an industry we don't spend very long thinking about. And I guess I'm proposing that if we spend a bit longer thinking about all of those nuts and bolts, our chances of getting brave work out of the door and inside and outside into the external world will go up exponentially. I want you to cast your minds back to a slightly simpler era. Not so long ago, there were only two media channels. There was essentially telly, and then there was print. And what that meant was, there were agencies who were hired for their broadcast expertise. Clients didn't really understand how to make TV ads. They didn't do it very often. They weren't media owners, they weren't content creators. Probably once a year, they darkened the door of an agency and they commissioned two pieces of work, a TV execution and a print execution. And in a way, that gave agencies a fighting chance, because if you think about it, if you have an expertise, it immediately gives you a sense of authority, and immediately the dynamic between client and agency is a bit more like parent-child, rather than adult to adult. I just want to play you a clip. It's a very extreme example of this. But all you need to know is that Don Draper has just presented a rather risque bikini ad to a very wholesome conservative client.
Well, it's somehow dirtier not seeing anything.
You need to decide what kind of company you want to be. Comfortable and dead, or risky, and possibly rich.
All I know is we don't want that.
Well, gentlemen, you're wondering what a creative agency looks like. There you have it. Hope you enjoyed looking in the window. Good evening.
Where are you going? Control yourself. And cool off. And hopefully Campbell can talk him into hearing a few more ideas in a week or so.
What? No, that's not the point. Out! Get out!
Done. Excuse me?
Get your things and get out of my office now! Come on, let's go!
say that's what I did. And I know that looks really old school, but if you think about it, that agencies are still behaving in quite an old-fashioned way. All too often we take a brief and we take the client's piece of paper and we look at it, and then we disappear into a cupboard with our friends for 6 weeks. And then we come out and we kind of go, ta-da! And the client sits there and feels really, really nervous. And I'm not sure in this day and age, that's really a technique that's going to get us very far. Because it really is a whole new world out there. The pace of change at the moment is mind-boggling. There's been a recession, that's a scary thing. Budgets are pressed, timings are pressed, jobs aren't secure. If you think about it, that kind of doesn't make anyone, whether in agency or client world, preconditioned to necessarily do something that risky. And then added to that, there aren't just 2 media channels anymore. We don't just broadcast messages, we sustain conversations. So clients have kind of turned, marketing departments are no longer just pushing messages to the outside world, pushing information. They're trying to play a role in people's lives of kind of being an interesting and engaging friend. That's really hard. It's complicated and no one's used to that yet. And we don't all have the answers. We're still making it up. We're still waiting to see where the deck of cards is going to fall. So the world is more complex. And it's changed. And I don't think the old rules work anymore. I don't think the to-dial moment is going to help us. I think we've got to develop new ways of making great ideas happen. And I think that's because clients now, they're media owners and they're content creators. And that parent-child thing, well, it's rude anyway, but it just won't cut it. So before I start to really talk about some hints and tips of what you might like to think about along the way when you know you've got a really brave idea on your hands, I just want to take one moment to stop and think about the emotional context within which you'll be operating if you're making a really brave idea. No matter what it is, no matter what form it takes, no matter what media it's in. Because there's a fundamental human truth. And that is, brave work is inherently risky. And there's no hiding from that. And the problem is, brave ideas scare people. And scared people are risk averse. As a species, human beings, we're tribal. So, deep in our heads, in our neurological pathways, we are programmed to conform. As a species, we don't really like standing out. We don't really like poking our head above the parapet, or you're unusual if you do. Because most people are worried if they poke their head above the parapet, they're going to get shot off. So if you think about this, is the state of mind your client is going to be in if you're trying to manage a great creative work, a piece of creative work out the door. It's likely that in a very small way, they will be feeling fight or flight. That's the body's response to fear. Now, neither position, neither fight nor flight is useful if you're an account manager in an agency trying to sustain a really productive conversation with someone. And this is why I think maybe there's a bit of an old school account management trick that I always say to my teams. You need to make sure your nerve endings go right to the end of your fingertips. And what I mean by that is take a moment, every time you see the client or even internal stakeholders in the agency, just take a moment and look around the room and have a think about where everyone's head is and what they're going to be feeling, and then conduct the conversation accordingly. I think I've got time to play with a really absurd ad suddenly because it's probably an entertainment high point. But the first agency I worked for was called HHCL. And HHCL was a London-based agency that won Agency of the Decade in 2000. It no longer exists in its current form, but it built a track record for kind of making the most standout creative work in London at the time. And when I first got a job there, I was so excited. And I was so excited because I thought it was the coolest place in town. And when you walked in, it just looked really exciting. They hot desk before anyone hot desk. It just was highly desired. Everyone looked super cool. No one looked under pressure. And I thought I was going to have a lovely time. Which I did, but not in the way that I thought I was. And then on my first day, I got a bit of a nasty shock because the CEO sat me down and talked me through the agency positioning, which was all about being a professional radical. It's a kind of odd phrase, really, but it's best he told me. He said to me, Juliet, we are all about making creatively brave ideas. And what you need to understand is, if you're making a creatively brave idea, you're essentially asking a client to skateboard down a very steep hill with you, or to take off with you, to go into the unknown. And think about this. Many of you would have flown here today, I imagine, and think about how you would have felt. As if after you were approaching the aeroplane, that there was no steward or stewardess to say hello. And then you sat down at your seat, and your seatbelt was a bit shonky and it didn't really work. And then maybe there was no safety instructions in the front pocket. And then when the pilot kind of did his announcement, it sounded a bit crackly and shit. How would you feel as the plane taxied down the runway to take off? Probably a little bit nervous. And it's the same with the client. And so what he said to me was not something I really wanted to hear at the start of my cool new job. What he said to me is, the old school account management skills are your greatest weapon. All the so-called boring stuff, like getting the contact report done within 12 hours, like making sure the meeting room's set up properly, like having, all of that stuff, it's super important. And it's super important because it makes people trust you. It makes people feel that you're professional. And if you're not professional, they're not going to follow you anywhere. I'm going to say something quite odd now, which is I don't think every brief that comes into an agency is a prime candidate for creative bravery or an inherently risky solution. I would love it if that was the case, but I think we'd need twice the number of people and twice the number of hours in the day. I think what you need to do with your agencies is opportunity spot. There are clients and briefs that come your way that have brave and race written all over them because actually they're a clever way of unlocking the client business problem. If you pursue every brief mindlessly, you'll end up with really disillusioned and tired employees, and you won't have a very good strike rate. So if you do have a brief that comes in and you think, yes, it's right, I can see why challenging the category conventions is going to unlock a whole new territory for the client, you start talking to the client about bravery from day one, from the moment their brief lands. You start understanding their client's attitude to risk. Ask them, do you know how brave they are? Do you know how gung-ho they are? Maybe not. Ask them. Define with them up front what type of idea you're looking for. You get them to sign up to the fact that the solution to this brief is inherently going to push the boundaries. When you come to show them work in 3 weeks' time or whenever it is, you're kind of set up to succeed. You also need to understand where the brief sits in the commercial landscape of the client. There are certain clients who have innovation sectors and innovation divisions, and you can figure out how to key into that. For example, Coca-Cola has a 70-20-10 rule. I won't explain it all. It is explained on the link of assets at the end. But suffice to say that 10% of everything that Coca-Cola does has a mandate and a license to push boundaries and to really drive innovation and learning to be taken back into the rest of the organisation. Many clients, many big clients, have that kind of structure going on. It's just we don't know about it. And if you know about it, it's much easier to manipulate a brief into that space. The other thing you can do, if your client roster isn't full of the most gung-ho clients in the world, is actually pick smaller briefs or an element of a large integrated brief to really drive experimentation and learning. So on Sky, one of our main clients, our massive broadcaster in London, we have inherited a creative vehicle, which is okay. It's not bad. It doesn't kind of set the world aflame. It works though, and it's all about putting celebrities into white worlds and then talking through, basically doing a glorified product demonstration. So far, so good. But what we said to Sky was, there was an element, they tasked us with producing 2 or 3 VOD campaigns and video on demand. And in that area, they were much more relaxed about it, and so they were happy to give us our heads on the understanding that whatever we learn on the VOD executions, when we came to make our next major campaign, we would use that learning. I'm going to skip over the main TV ad and just show you the result of the VOD campaigns.
My husband just loves watching.
I think I am.
I saw it through the crow's eyes. I'm Daenerys Targaryen Stormborn, the Amber of Dragons.
The world must know what happened here. Real Game of Thrones on demand.
I don't think we saw the full glory of that because of the stop-start. But,
They're here. What do you know about the walkers? Nobody gets in my way. Every episode of The Walking Dead on demand.
those little trails were just there to promote content and box sets. We had to use Joanna Lumley. She's a very fine comic actress that some of you will know. She's done such a brilliant job. We played to her strengths, and we played to the conventions of those box sets and the content itself. And that's going to be our TV campaign for Sky next year. So there is hope. If you don't feel you've got enough briefs in your agency where you can really stretch your legs, there are ways and means of creating opportunities. And now coming on to the process that we use as client and agency. And there's a word that is so overused in our industry at the moment. I don't know about you, but it really does my head in. And that word is this. Can we go down the chart, please? Kind of builds the tension, doesn't it? Woohoo! So, that word is collaborate. I don't think it's a terrible word necessarily. The dictionary definition is interesting, as ever. It's the top one is just about working together. So far, so good. That's really fine and dandy. And the second one is a little bit more interesting. It says to cooperate as a traitor, especially with an enemy occupying one's own country. And I think that's the problem with the word collaboration. I've talked about collaboration a lot in the past year, and quite often I'm met with huge suspicion and a little bit of anger, because there are lots of people who hear the word collaboration and replace it in their heads as capitulation. They feel that if you collaborate with a client, what you're doing is essentially handing in your expertise and your respect and your dignity at the door. That you're kind of throwing out the window your right to actually hold true to an opinion and fight for what you believe in. I think the problem is that most of us don't really know how to collaborate properly. We all say we do, but we don't really. We all get round the table and then no one speaks the truth. And if no one speaks the truth, we're never going to get anywhere. The next clip I want to show you, which I hope works and doesn't just stutter like the last couple, is from a guy called Jonathan Mildenhall. And Jonathan Mildenhall is a very, very senior client globally at Coca-Cola. Many of you will have heard of him or know him or have heard him speak. He joined Coca-Cola about 5 years ago. And his one ambition was to make sure he made Coca-Cola a more creatively brave organisation. And in order to do that, he is focused very heavily on finding a way of collaborating so it produces effective and incredibly brave work. Can we go slide down?
I truly believe that the process towards great creative work is a process for genuine collaboration. But at the same time, I see a lot of client organisations abusing the concept of collaboration, and I see a lot of agencies misusing the promise of collaboration. And so for me, collaboration is really about an agency coming up with an outstanding idea that may well be positioned over here, and then we as a client respond with our thoughts that might take the position over here. And if the process of collaboration is just bickering between these two different positions, I don't believe that that's going to lead to great creative work. But if the process of collaboration is iterating the client idea and the agency idea so that you both get to a more compelling third space, then I genuinely do believe that the relationship is strengthened, the ideas are strengthened, and the success in the market, because it's gone through a genuine open collaboration process, will be that much greater.
real sense of self. Absolutely, it means you have to listen to the client and really understand where they're coming from. But it also means you have to tell the truth as you see it from your point of view. It means you have to be open-minded and be able to have a really dynamic conversation where you reframe ideas. But equally, you need the honesty to say, if you get to that third space that Jonathan talks about and you look at it and it's not good enough, take it off the table and start again. If I ruled the advertising world, actually, I would ban the word collaboration. I just think it's too loaded now. And I would like us to focus instead on having really authentic relationships. And I think authentic relationships is a very, very simple thing, really. All it means is being yourself. It means you're not playing a role, whether it's producer or suit. It means you're bringing yourself to work. And it means that whatever you do with an honesty and integrity. And it means that if you've done the professional radical thing and you've done the authentic relationship thing, when you hit a bump in the road with a client, which you will, because creatively brave ideas aren't easy to make, then you will have a robustness to be able to have a fight or to get over the problem together and come back in the next day and start again. Can we skip down 2 charts, please?
So whatever creative inspiration you have, whatever personal inspiration, whatever personal...
Just running out of time. Authentic people don't just appear, you have to find them. We have a really simple recruitment rule at Brothers and Sisters, which is no brilliant wankers. And the reason why we have the no brilliant wankers rule, David Ogilvy, I've stolen that from David Ogilvy, he says no phony zeros or bastards. I think he means the same thing as we do, which is a brilliant wanker was really, really useful in the Mad Men era, because they were so true to themselves, they were so confident they didn't give a shit about anyone around them. But actually in this kind of world where we need to have more authentic relationships, where we need to work as a team, they're really not helpful. Once you've found your authentic people who are talented and who really want to make great work, the next thing you have to do is manage them lightly. There's nothing worse than being followed around everywhere and being checked in on. You need to put a team of people together, every single one of whom are capable of having a client-facing conversation, whether that's a producer, a project manager, an account person, or a creative. They need to be a small, tight team, and you need to let them go, and you need to let them do their thing. And you don't be afraid of putting production experts in front of clients. I think that's really old school. There's no need to hide anyone in the cupboard. Everyone is there to inspire confidence in the client. I know full well that I've had conversations with production people by my side that I could never have had in such a compelling way. Can we switch down 2 slides?
One of the...
So the next big moment in the life of a creative idea is the big first client presentation. And the trick here is to position the idea so it doesn't look as though you've had an insane rush of blood to the head and got a bit overexcited, but to make it look like a reasonable business decision. And to do that, there are lots of tools you can use. It's about the professional radical thing. It's also about using case studies really well and taking in learnings from other categories and things other people have done to make the client feel more comfortable. But it's also avoiding the hard, big sell. No client I know really wants to be sold to. Whatever you do, don't go for the ta-da moment. Be honest. Tell them about the idea's strengths, but look the risks in their eye. Great work is inherently risky. Don't pretend there aren't any, but just make it clear that you've thought them through. And then after the client presentation, don't relax. I think it's human nature. You come out of the client presentation, that's gone well, and you kind of want to give each other high fives and go down the pub for a beer. Do that, but then come back in the next day and keep the momentum up. Because a lot of this is speed. The more you give a client a chance to think about it, worry about it, and tell other people about it and invent problems, the less likely I think it is to get out of the door. So keep the momentum up. The other thing to really be alive to is who are the actual stakeholders who can now prevent this idea from happening. There is always a CEO or a board member hiding somewhere about a client organisation. Make sure you track them down alongside your marketing director. If the chief exec is the marketing director in the agency, doing a really good job together, and they look as though they're a team, they look as though they're all over it, you've probably got more of a chance of succeeding. And then finally, so kind of the last note that I want to leave you with.
Capcom had a challenge. How do they turn a new game?
Is that the launch day is a start date. It's not an end point. I think, again, in the old days where work was more simple, you just had to play stuff out and then you could walk away and you can forget about it. But brave work has always been really, really polarising. That's the point of it, is to make people talk. And maybe 10 years ago they did talk around the water cooler, but there was no public way of aggregating those conversations. Nowadays it's called Twitter, and all the other social media that surrounds it. And that means the risks and rewards for a creatively brave idea have both gone up. But what you can't do is just push the work out there and cross your fingers and hide behind the table. You need to make sure that you've scenario planned whatever the response is. For Resident Evil 6, I'd encourage you all to go and have a look at the long form case study that's on the link we're about to show you. But for Resident Evil 6, we had a 9-month editorial calendar figured out for our first client presentation. And then what we did is, once everything had played out and we'd started, we were very flexible. We had all of our assets in a bank, but we brought them forward, we moved some back, we shifted them around according to what people were saying in an outside world. So it's all about preparation, and it's all about making sure that you don't just press send and then forget about it. Because if you do that, something will bite you on the arse, it just will. And if something bites you on the arse, it means it's a bit your client on the arse, and if that's happened, then it's not a very happy place to be. And so that is my last tip to you. And as promised, we'll get this to go down. There's lots more reading around this subject. David Ogilvy has produced a great book on creative management. There's a 30-minute TED talk about the art of being yourself and being really authentic at work. And as I say, there's all the ads and kind of long-form content around it. Thank you very much.